Welcome to my yearly rankings in which I rank every PlayStation game I've played from a specific year. Last time we covered 1995. Link to that will be in the description and at the end of the video. This year is 1996, the first full year of the PlayStation and the birth of some of gaming's most iconic franchises. Let's take a closer look at 1996. Starting us off in last place at number 14, The Incredible Hulk, The Pantheon Saga is not only the worst game of 1996, but easily one of the worst games I've ever played. It seriously is so bad, it's tempting to create a whole nother F category below an E on my rating scale just for this game, but I don't even want to give it the credit for that. Poor controls, zero effort in the story, painful camera system, awful graphics, the fact that this has barely any resemblance to what a Hulk game should be, with shoddy level design and terrible sound design, this game needs dissolving in acid. It's putrid. Stay out of a 50-foot radius of this one, it's certainly not worth it. One step higher at 13th place is yet another Marvel video game, and the first Marvel game to come to PlayStation. However, Iron Man and Exo Manowar in heavy metal is not the big triumph you'd expect from the brand, and the character. It's one of the clunkiest and dismal side-scrolling shooters imaginable, with raggedy graphics, a forgettable 90s soundtrack, ear-piercing sound effects, and truly unfair gameplay that is not fun in any sense of the word. While it may come with a two-player co-op mode, I seriously think there's nothing of value here to recommend it in the slightest. This game froze Iron Man in carbonite, with the Armored Avenger not getting the attention he deserved until Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal in the late 2000s. Coming in at 12th place is the first Dragon Ball game to grace the PlayStation, Dragon Ball being my favourite anime when I was growing up. I had a friend's copy of this game, Dragon Ball Z Ultimate Battle 22, when I was younger. Unfortunately, even back then, I saw this as a lackluster fighting game that barely held my attention for very long. While it does have a huge cast of fighters for a PlayStation 1 fighting game, these are the clunkiest versions of the characters that I've ever witnessed, with botched controls, poor framerate stutters, shabby graphics, and slow gameplay. Ultimate Battle 22 is nothing short of an embarrassment. Forever.
Can I persuade you to take a sandwich with you, sir?
I'll get drive-through.
Moving up from the E-rated games to a D- in quality is number 11, Batman Forever, the first Batman game to hit the PlayStation. It's not a whole lot better than the previous games listed so far. In fact, it also suffers from similar problems to Ultimate Battle 22, with it being an unsatisfactory looking and controlling brawler. Being inspired by side-scrolling beat-em-ups that came before it, Batman Forever can have its moments of fun when played with a friend in two-player co-op. However, that fun only lasts so long when you're fighting the same few thugs over and over and over and over and over. With only two recognisable villains in the entire game, the Riddler and Two-Face, zero standout features, poor graphics and mind-numbing gameplay, Batman Forever can stay in the past. Starting us off the top 10 of 1996 is Twisted Metal, sitting on a D. Yeah, this may be a controversial one, but I seriously do not enjoy the first Twisted Metal game. Yeah, I think the design of the game is awesome, the characters and the vehicles to choose from are super cool, but the game is one of the worst aged games I've ever played. This game is not fun to control, it's not fun to look at, its super thin selection of modes makes it a quick wham bam and moving swiftly on. In at 9th spot is Mickey's Wild Adventure, as cardboard of a 2D platformer as you can get, with barely anything to distinguish itself from the rest. Each level does do a grand job of paying tributes to Mickey Mouse's history and every style that he's been through, but I found this to be a pretty cumbersome and forgettable platformer in a year when there was so much more stronger competition, as we'll soon see. At 8th place is one of 1996's most ambitious new mascot platformers, Gex. Gex was Crystal Dynamics' mascot character. This was before their days of Tomb Raider and Marvel's Avengers. Heavily inspired by Sonic, Gex was a side-scroller collectathon in which you controlled a gecko who loves to watch films and TV. Thus each of the stages are based on a specific genre of television, and in addition to the regular jump mechanic of platformers, Gex could crawl along surfaces and snap his tongue out to grab collectibles and power-ups. All of these traits are what stood Gex out from the swarms of mascot platformers that the 90s had. Gex was endearing and had a radical attitude, always spitting out one-liners, but just like with the game's dated jokes that just aren't as funny as they possibly were in the 90s, the difficulty of this game is also very aged. With poor collision and hit detection, slippery controls, progression locked behind getting certain collectibles, levels that felt like they weren't really built for Gex, and a lack of a save feature, Gex is an interesting but frustrating experience, and I'm glad, however, he did get a sequel. Ooh, spoiler. Number 7, we get Final Doom. Published by Midway Games, this was a compilation of 2 expansion packs to the original Doom game, but they weren't developed by the original creators id Software. The difficulty was notably toned up for this game as it was intended for Doom veterans, and the game loves to throw more powerful enemies at you very early on into the game. Final Doom wasn't a whole lot different to the original Doom seen in the 95 ranking video. It's got all the same assets, it's the same level palettes, and the same weapons and enemies. The level design is different and a little less quality, often relying too much on large maze-like designs without memorable placements, making it very easy to get lost, and the random complexity of the levels can make the frame rate stutter. The difficulty of the enemy spawns creates an experience with barely any build-up. A tough Doom challenge, but only for those wanting to face it.
I feel like hell. They say the first one hurts the worst. How many psionics did your dad have? I don't know, like 4 or 5?
All the psionics in the world couldn't have saved him from that terrorist ambush. That's why you've always got to keep your eyes open. And watch your ass. Nothing too shocking. Maybe it's time you tried it out. Run the gauntlet and get your butt out alive. And watch your ass.
Out of the 2 FPS games I've played from 1996, Disruptor at 6th spot takes the lead over Final Doom. Insomniac's first video game, you can see the roots for their Ratchet & Clank and Resistance series here with Disruptor. A first-person shooter set in the future. You battle through awesome looking alien planets and wield a neat selection of weapons and psionic powers. The weapons all had unique firing modes and the levels were full of interesting aliens to find. However, it didn't quite have the lasting impact as 95's Doom did. While it tried to tell a story, Disruptor was full of cringe-filled, live-action cutscenes with cheesy dialogue and cheap sets. The level design was very basic, with a lot of tight corners that doesn't lend well to the cumbersome PS1 controls, and the enemies that littered the levels had some of the dumbest AI imaginable. The psionic abilities also felt very tacked on and underutilized, but nevertheless Disruptor was a charming Doom clone and laid the groundwork for Insomniac's future projects. At number 5 is Mortal Kombat Trilogy. This game would mark the end of the franchise's 2D fighting style, and to celebrate the series' legacy, every character from the previous MK games, including the bosses, became playable. A huge improvement over 95's Mortal Kombat 3, this feels like the game 3 should have been, with a large roster of characters to play as, from Scorpion and Raiden to Noob Saibot and even Motaro. Tons of finishers to pull off, ranging from fatalities, babalities, friendships and animalities. Mortal Kombat Trilogy's only setbacks are the damn frustrating AI which has haunted all of these games, and loading for each of Shang Tsung's transformations. While not the most polished or balanced fighting game out there, Mortal Kombat Trilogy was a damn fun celebration. Coming in at 4th spot was Naughty Dog's first big hitter for PlayStation with Crash Bandicoot, the game that would become synonymous with the brand for the PS1 generation. Built as a rival to Sega's Sonic and Nintendo's Mario, Crash Bandicoot was the next step in transforming the traditional 2D side-scrolling platformer. Naughty Dog saw the success of Mario 64 and other games venturing into 3D, and thought, what if we take Sonic but stick the camera behind him? Dubbed the Sonic Arse game, Crash Bandicoot was still a linear platform, with the main goal being to get to the end of the level, but was viewed from a different perspective. Crash Bandicoot also tried a lot of level variety to keep the pace of the game feeling fresh, such as more classic side-scrolling levels, levels in which you ride a wild hog, and levels in which you run towards the camera from a giant boulder. In addition to its lovable charm and creative design, Crash Bandicoot had some of the highest end graphics for the time, with the thick green tribal settings having tons of detail, and all of the game's character models and animations borrowing some fantastic inspiration from classic cartoons. However, what keeps Crash low besides its innovations was its poor controls. Crash only comes with 2 moves, jumping and spinning, and these are accompanied with very stiff controls that make challenging platforming become frustrating and unenjoyable. The precision of Mario's movement as seen in Mario 64 was a lot to live up to for the Aussie marsupial, and thus being stuck to only using the D-pad makes the game rough to play. With some extra poor hit detection and unforgivable save system, Crash Bandicoot was a striking new mascot, but in serious need of an upgrade. Taking 3rd place is Capcom's forgotten fighting gem, Darkstalkers: The Night Warriors. Street Fighter 2, but with classic horror monsters. Darkstalkers introduces the abilities to block in the air, to crouch walk, and most importantly, chain combos. It was a terrific 2D fighter with a memorable cast of fighters and gorgeous animation and sprite work. This is one of my favourite fighters for the PlayStation 1, however it does suffer from a lack of modes, as many fighters from this time does, and the PS1 version is missing some frames of animation, but regardless, this is a Capcom fighter not to miss out on. My runner-up for 1996, sitting at 2nd spot, is Capcom's survival horror nightmare, Resident Evil, a frightening and fun experience that was unlike anything else in its day, featuring a cheesy live-action opening, great level design, terrific atmosphere, and is still enjoyable decades after its initial release. I'll never forget playing as Jill and Chris, witnessing that first zombie, almost becoming a Jill sandwich, and blowing up the dreaded mansion whilst Chris awkwardly smiles to the camera. But with this great game comes some aged mechanics and frustrating agile enemies. There's only one game from 1996 that can top Resident Evil for me. And my number one and my game of the year of 1996 is Core Design's Tomb Raider, the unprecedented 3D platforming action adventure inspired by Indiana Jones and James Bond. As Lara Croft, the pioneer in female gaming protagonists, you'll travel across the globe with a small arsenal of weapons, you'll battle against vicious wolves, other hunters, and even dinosaurs. With Lara's large assortment of moves and jumps, you'll traverse all over these giant explorative levels, crawling along walls, diving into pools, and swimming through trenches. While it may not be a looker today, featuring clunky pixelated graphics, and its controls weren't always the most accurate, Tomb Raider set brand new standards for how 3D action games should be perceived. It had a satisfying puzzle action platformer design that later games like Uncharted would draw its inspiration. It had great sound design, memorable battles, and birthed one of gaming's most legendary protagonists. Tomb Raider was an outstanding adventure. And that was the year of 1996, a huge move forward for the gaming world. Next time we'll look at 1997, the year in which many of the NES and SNES hot franchises would convert over to the PlayStation. It's a bigger year and I'll see you there. Have a great day.